Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something really fascinating. We are objectively breaking down a landmark, fully declassified 2010 internal military study. Our goal here? We want to understand the strategic, absolute necessity of minimizing civilian casualties in modern warfare. And we're looking at it directly from the perspective of the armed forces themselves. We're going to examine the very real, tactical, strategic, and institutional friction that forces face on the ground, and exactly how they adapt to it.
Okay, let's set the stakes right out of the gate. These are the exact words of General David H. Petraeus from the foreword of this very study. He states point blank that civilian casualties are an enduring challenge of war that absolutely must be reduced to a minimum. And he actually goes on to write that minimizing harm to civilians is a fundamental professional responsibility of the armed forces. So, it's not just a moral issue for them, it is a central, unavoidable operational challenge.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First up, the civilian casualty challenge. Then, the future operating environment. Third, we'll look at the mitigation life cycle. Fourth, the application of force. And finally, number 5, institutionalizing the solutions.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the civilian casualty challenge. This is really the anatomy of a modern strategic problem.
When you actually look at the primary source document, it's kind of wild. You can literally see the heavy redaction blocks right there on the page. It really grounds us in the highly sensitive, very real nature of this material. This specific study was initiated to fill a massive gap. The preface notes that the U.S. military basically realized that no single organization was comprehensively looking at the causes and prevention of civilian casualties from a purely operational perspective.
According to U.S. counterinsurgency or COIN doctrine, civilian casualties don't just look bad on the news, they actively sabotage the mission. It's a domino effect. Protecting the population prevents you from fueling the very insurgency you're fighting. Because think about it, when civilians are harmed, it totally undermines the legitimacy of the host nation's government, and that can actually push the local population to join or assist the enemy. So, by hyper-focusing on civilian protection, forces are ultimately reducing the direct risks to themselves. It's a rock-solid operational requirement.
Moving right along to Section 2, the future operating environment, focusing specifically on transparency and adversary exploitation.
The operating environment today has radically changed from the conflicts of the past. War is now incredibly transparent. With global telecommunications, near real-time information is instantly shared worldwide. You've got external actors, everyone from NGOs to global media, constantly evaluating battlefield conduct. Plus, international expectations are exceptionally high for U.S. forces just because of their advanced precision capabilities. But complicating this immensely is the fact that adversaries intentionally violate the laws of armed conflict. They deliberately use human shields, they hide among civilians, and they make false accusations of indiscriminate violence just to score strategic victories.
So this brings us to a really fascinating strategic paradox. You'd probably think that restricting firepower automatically endangers troops or compromises the mission, right? Well, the study actually found otherwise. They highlight historical adaptations, like in Sadr City, Baghdad back in 2008, where forces used highly adaptive tactics, fused intelligence, and precision weapons. They prove beyond a doubt that a military can successfully reduce civilian harm while completely maintaining its operational effectiveness, even against a fleeting enemy in a dense urban area. It literally is possible to achieve a win-win.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, the mitigation life cycle. Let's look at the framework for civilian protection.
To tackle this massive challenge, the core study team developed what they called the CivCast Lifecycle. Think of this as a continuous, step-by-step feedback loop. It kicks off with prepare, that's pre-deployment training and doctrine. Then you plan, involving heavy intelligence gathering and mission rehearsal. Next is employ, which is the actual tactical action on contact and applying the rules of engagement. Then you assess what happened by conducting battle damage assessments. Respond covers the aftermath, like medical care, key leader engagements, and information operations. And finally, learn, where rigorous investigations and data analysis feed right back into the preparation stage for the next time. It's a totally holistic view of the battlefield.
All right, jumping into Section 4, the application of force. This is where we examine the actual tactical friction happening on the ground.
Imagine you're a soldier on the ground in Afghanistan. You are facing immense bureaucratic and tactical friction. On one hand, you've got the U.S. Standing Rules of Engagement. These take a fairly broad view of what constitutes an imminent threat, basically allowing you to act in self-defense a bit more readily. But then on the other hand, you have the ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force Rules of Engagement. These require you to actually confirm the absolute absence of collateral damage concerns before using any offensive force. Trying to navigate those two differing definitions of self-defense and hostile intent in a split second while under fire, that is a tremendous, tremendous burden on the frontline soldier.
Because those stakes were so incredibly high, in July 2009, General Stanley McChrystal issued a brand new tactical directive. The whole point was to reorient the choices forces were making regarding the use of force, hyper-focusing on reducing civilian harm. But the big question we have to ask is, what was the actual data-driven impact on the ground once that directive was issued?
Well, the data in the study reveals a super fascinating shift. Looking at 2009 into early 2010, the directive totally worked in one major way. It significantly reduced casualties from air-to-ground strikes. And overall, civilian casualty rates stabilized, which is huge considering there were way more troops and a much higher operational tempo. But, classic whack-a-mole situation, a new primary challenge emerged. Escalation of force, or EOF incidents. Think of high-stress situations like vehicles approaching checkpoints or managing unpredictable crowds. Those spiked. In fact, by the first half of 2010, EOF became the single largest contributor to coalition-caused civilian casualties. As soon as one problem was solved, another one popped right up to take its place.
So how do you combat those ground-level EOF issues? A really key tactical solution emerged: partnering. The data clearly showed that coalition forces had a significantly reduced rate of civilian casualties during operations where they were partnered side by side with Afghan national security forces. And why is that? Because the Afghan forces provided coalition troops with absolutely crucial cultural cues. They could communicate better with the locals, gather intel much more effectively, and ultimately, they could just better discriminate a true threat from an innocent civilian who might just be acting in an unexpected way.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5. Institutionalizing the solutions, so the military can actually sustain this progress.
The study essentially found a huge lack of synchronization between the forces actually fighting in theater and the massive institutions back home. To avoid relearning these incredibly painful lessons in future conflicts, the report forcefully recommended a way ahead for the Department of Defense. They said, look, we need to explicitly articulate civilian casualty reduction directly in our official policy. We need to assign specific organizational responsibility so this doesn't just fall through the cracks. We have to create standards to evaluate our progress, and crucially, we need to develop a permanent, dedicated cadre of experts in operational analysis.
If you take away just one thing from this explainer, let it be the core philosophy of this report. Civilian protection is not simply a secondary, nice-to-have humanitarian consideration. It is a fundamental operational requirement. Minimizing casualties actively preserves the military's freedom of operation, it improves strategic communications, and it directly ensures the strategic success of the entire mission. At the end of the day, if the population turns against you, the war is lost.
I really want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to chew on. We've just seen how unbelievably complex this issue was back in 2010. Today, as warfare is getting even more complicated, integrating AI, drone swarms, and highly automated technologies, the battlefield is shifting once again. If protecting civilians is the absolute key to operational freedom, how will future military leaders maintain this incredibly delicate, essential balance when those split-second life-or-death decisions might eventually be made by algorithms rather than human soldiers? It's something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the systems that shape our world.